They laughed at Turner's rust bucket of a ship until it was the only thing standing between a human colony and total annihilation. Turner gripped the cracked leather of his pilot's chair, hands flexing in frustration, as the snooty voice of the Voth traffic controller crackled over his comm. Docking request denied. That junker belongs in a museum, not a modern spaceport. Turner growled into the mic. Listen here, you scaly bureaucrat, I've got a cargo hold full of medical supplies for the human colony on Sirius B. They're dying down there. Sirius B? Our records show no registered human settlements in that sector, the Voth replied, oozing superiority. It was established after your kind so graciously stopped bombing us back to the Stone Age in the last war. Unsurprising, it's not in your databases. You expect me to believe that? Vacate our space immediately or be fired upon. Turner's jaw clenched. The colony was desperate. Starvation, plagues, raiders. If these supplies didn't get through, thousands would perish. Fine, I'll find someone who actually gives a damn about human lives. He yanked the controls, banking hard. 3 Voth destroyers decloaked around him, weapons glowing with deadly intent. The controller's smug trill sounded again. Gary Turner, you are under arrest for trespassing, conspiring with enemies of the Voth ascendancy, and subjecting our noble race to that rubbish scow you call a ship. Son of a... The rest was lost in a string of colourful metaphors, as Turner cut his engines, glaring at the massive warships filling his view screen. Complying was his only option. For now. But one way or another, he swore, this old museum piece was going to save those colonists, even if it killed him. The heavy clank of armoured boots echoed through the corridors as the Voth soldiers stormed onto Turner's ship, their plasma rifles raised. The bitter legacy of centuries of war hung thick in the recycled air. Humans and Voth locked in an endless cycle of bloodshed over world's wealth and wounded pride. The Voth saw themselves as the rightful rulers of the galaxy, superior to the soft, feeble humans in every way. But their victory in the last war was hard-bought, costing countless ships and Voth lives. The treaty was meant to shatter humanity's spine forever, to grind them under the Voth's armored heel. No new colonies, no free passage through Voth space. Submit or be destroyed. But some humans refused to bend the knee. Splinter factions, declaring themselves free of Earth's groveling government, carved out a fragile existence on the fringe. Outlaws and pirates, the Voth called them. Heroes and freedom fighters, they called themselves. Turner was one of those renegades, his ship more than a simple mercy mission. Under the medical supplies lay a cache of advanced weapons, scrounged and stolen, destined for the beleaguered Sirius B colonists. Weapons to hold the line against Voth aggression. Weapons to keep the dream of freedom alive. The Voth soldiers burst into the cockpit, shouting in their guttural tongue, ordering Turner to surrender. He raised his hands slowly, praying to whatever gods might listen that they wouldn't look too closely at his cargo manifest. If they found the weapons, it would be the end of the colony, and his own life would be forfeit. The lead soldier jabbed his rifle barrel into Turner's chest, hissing a question that needed no translation. What was his real purpose here? Why was a human in restricted space? Turner swallowed hard, mind racing for a believable lie. The soldier's eyes narrowed, his finger tightening on the trigger. Turner's ship groaned, the bulkheads creaking like arthritic joints. The soldier glanced away for a split second, distracted by the noise. Turner seized his chance. He lunged for the control panel, slamming his fist down on a large red button. A klaxon blared, emergency lights flashing crimson. The Voth soldiers looked around in confusion, momentarily disoriented. Turner used their distraction to dive behind the pilot's chair, reaching for the pulse pistol strapped beneath it. He whipped it out, firing rapidly at the soldiers. 2 went down, holes smoking in their armor. The rest returned fire, blasting chunks out of the console, narrowly missing Turner as he scrambled for cover. Sparks fountained from ruptured conduits, smoke filling the cockpit. A lucky shot from a Voth rifle clipped Turner in the shoulder, spinning him around. He crashed to the deck, his weapon clattering away. The lead soldier loomed over him, a predatory gleam in his slitted eyes. He aimed his rifle at Turner's head, mandibles quivering with anticipation. Turner glared up at him, defiant to the end. The soldier's finger tightened on the trigger. A burst of static from Solaris's wrist-mounted comm startled Turner out of his daze. The Voth commander growled orders in clipped, angry tones. The meaning was clear enough, even without translation. Turner's little act of defiance hadn't won him any mercy. The soldiers hauled Turner out of his ship, their grip vice-tight on his arms. Turner winced but held his head high as they marched him into the main concourse of the spaceport. Reptilian eyes glared from all directions, cold and assessing. Turner's skin crawled under their hostile scrutiny. He was an intruder, an enemy. He didn't belong here. A deafening klaxon cut through the low buzz of activity, echoing off the high metal walls. Red lights flashed in strobing pulses. The Voth around him tensed, hands going to weapons. One of the soldiers barked a question at Solaris, who snarled a response. Turner caught one word he recognized: transmission. His heart leaped. His ship had sent the distress beacon. His people knew he'd been captured. Help was coming. Apparently, Solaris had come to the same conclusion. He jabbed a long-clawed finger at Turner, mandibles flaring with rage. The soldiers instantly changed course, dragging Turner not toward the main security office, but deeper into the spaceport. Toward the high-security detention block, if Solaris's guttural commands were any indication. They passed a mammoth set of sealed blast doors, a full squad of guards stationed in front. Through the translucent viewport, Turner glimpsed a flurry of activity. Voth engineers in protective gear were crawling all over a ship in the central berth, a ship unlike any Turner had seen before. Diamondine and shimmering, it almost seemed to drink in the light around it. The material of the hull was like nothing he'd encountered either. It didn't look like any alloy he knew. "A Voth ship?" Turner asked, knowing it wasn't. One of his guards grunted. "Unknown vessel, found a week ago, abandoned. Not Voth, not human, something new." Turner saw a flicker of unease in the guard's slitted eyes, echoed in the tense postures of the soldiers around him. The Voth were rattled. They didn't know what they were dealing with. An unexpected variable, a threat they couldn't yet quantify. An idea sparked in Turner's mind. A crazy, desperate gamble. But it was all he had. He stopped short, causing his escorts to stumble. Before they could react, he threw his head back and began to convulse, his eyes rolling wildly. He loosed a stream of gasping, gurgling nonsense, just random syllables strung together, into something that sounded vaguely language-like. "Klaatu, Barada, Nikto!" He let his body go rigid, then collapsed bonelessly to the deck, twitching and frothing at the mouth. The guards leaped away from him as if burned, mandibles gaping in shock. For a moment no one moved. Turner held his breath, hoping. Then Solaris stalked forward, eyes narrowed with suspicion. He prodded Turner with the muzzle of his plasma rifle. "Get up, human. I won't fall for your tricks." Turner surged upward, knocking the gun aside. He lashed out with a vicious kick, catching Solaris in the knee. Something crunched. The Voth howled in pain, stumbling back. Turner snatched a fallen pistol and sprinted down a side corridor, energy bolts sizzling past his head. Alarms shrieked anew. He heard Solaris roaring orders to seal the spaceport, to lock everything down. Turner's heart hammered against his ribs. He had to find a way out. He had to escape. To get back to his ship, back to his mission. Those colonists were depending on him. He couldn't let them down. He wouldn't, no matter the cost. Turner's boots pounded the metallic floor as he sprinted through the spaceport's winding corridors. Alarms blared, the flashing red emergency lights casting eerie shadows. He ducked and wove, using every scrap of cover, support beams, cargo crates, idle machinery. His combat instincts, honed over years of guerrilla warfare against the Voth, guided his movements. He slipped past one security patrol, then another, always staying one step ahead. But the Voth were relentless. Each exit Turner tried was sealed, blast doors slammed shut and maglocked. Squads of soldiers converged on his location, coordinating their movements with practiced efficiency. Turner was trapped, a rat in a maze with no way out. Except one, the docking bays. Ships were still coming and going, the lockdown not yet complete. If he could just get aboard one. There, a small Voth courier vessel, engines already thrumming with pre-launch power. Turner put on a burst of speed, legs pumping, lungs burning. He was almost to the ship's ramp when a plasma bolt sizzled past his ear. He spun to see Solaris and a phalanx of soldiers spilling from an adjacent passage, weapons spitting deadly fire. Turner leapt for the ship's hatch, slamming his fist against the door controls. The ramp snapped shut just as a volley of plasma rounds pinged off the hull. Turner staggered to the pilot's seat, hands flying over the unfamiliar controls. The engines roared to full power and the ship blasted free of its moorings. The docking bay's containment field shimmered and strained against the onslaught of the ship's thrusters. Then it shattered, atmosphere venting in a hurricane rush. Loose crates and equipment were sucked out into the void, along with a few unlucky Voth who hadn't managed to magnetize their boots in time. Proximity alarms howled as Turner careened out of the bay. The agile courier ship slipped through the chaos, plasma bolts from Voth attack craft peppering its shields. Turner wrestled with the controls, wrenching the ship into a stomach-churning corkscrew. G-forces pressed him back into the seat, vision tunneling. As he leveled out, Turner scanned the control panels, searching for weapons, a cloaking device, anything that might give him an edge. But the courier ship was bare bones, built for speed and stealth, not combat. It had no guns, no advanced defensive systems, and the nav computer showed no FTL drive. He couldn't jump to light speed, couldn't outrun the Voth warships that were even now spooling up their engines to pursue. Turner needed a place to hide, and fast. He checked the sensor readouts, looking for anything that might work. There at the edge of scanner range, an asteroid field, dense and sprawling. The drifting rocks would play havoc with sensors and make maneuvering treacherous, but it was his only chance. Turner banked hard, arrowing toward the field. The nimble courier ship slipped between the tumbling asteroids, some as small as pebbles, others as large as mountains. The Voth pursuers fell behind, their bulkier ships struggling to navigate the hazardous terrain. But they were still coming, and Turner's ship shuddered and bucked as smaller rocks pinged off its hull. Warning lights flashed, damage reports scrolling across the screens. He needed a better hiding spot, and soon, because if the asteroids didn't pulverize his ship, the Voth would. Turner gritted his teeth, hands white-knuckled on the controls. Once again the odds were stacked against him, but he'd never let that stop him before. He'd fight on, like he always had, for his ship, for his mission, for the people counting on him. Failure was not an option. Turner wrenched the courier ship's controls, sending it into a dizzying spin. The nimble craft slipped between two massive asteroids with barely a hair's breadth to spare. Proximity alarms blared as the ship's hull scraped against jagged rock. Behind him, the bulkier Voth vessels struggled to navigate the treacherous field. One clipped an asteroid, sending it careening into another ship. The resulting explosion lit up Turner's rear monitors. He allowed himself a grim smile. The Voth may have superior technology, but out here amid the chaotic swirl of ancient stone and cosmic dust, piloting skill mattered more, and Turner had spent years honing his running smuggling jobs through the Kuiper Belt, dodging Voth patrols in the Oort cloud. This place, with its shifting gravitational eddies and unpredictable debris patterns, was as familiar to him as the cockpit of his own ship. Another explosion bloomed, then another, as more Voth ships met their end against the unforgiving rocks. But a few skilled pilots remained doggedly on Turner's tail, matching his every move. Plasma bolts sizzled past the courier ship's canopy, leaving molten pockmarks in their wake. Turner jinked and juked, putting every ounce of his considerable skill into keeping ahead of his pursuers. Sweat beaded his brow, the acrid tang of burnt insulation filling his nostrils. The ship couldn't take much more of this. He swung around a planetoid-sized asteroid, and his heart leapt. There, embedded in the rock face, was a sprawling industrial complex. Modular hab blocks and processing facilities clustered around a central tower, connected by a web of enclosed walkways. Massive ore haulers sat idle in docking bays, their cavernous holds dark and empty. Turner recognized it instantly. A human mining operation, abandoned when the last war broke out. Before the Voth came, facilities like this had been the backbone of the human economy in this sector, extracting the rich mineral wealth of the asteroid belt. When the Voth attacked, the miners had no choice but to flee, leaving billions in infrastructure behind. Infrastructure that might just save Turner's life. If the complex's systems were still functional, it would have life support, power, maybe even a cache of weapons. And its warren of tunnels and chambers would be a perfect place to lose the Voth, or at least find a defensible position. Turner banked hard, aiming for a gaping hole in the complex's outer shell, likely the result of some long-ago asteroid impact. The courier ship shuddered as it plunged through into the cavernous space beyond. Emergency lights flickered feebly, casting eerie shadows across abandoned machinery. Turner set the ship down in the first docking bay he saw, the landing gear clanging on corroded metal. He was out of the pilot's seat before the engines had fully spooled down, snatching a plasma rifle from the limp grasp of the dead Voth soldier slumped over the co-pilot's console. He sprinted for the airlock, boots ringing on the deck plates. As he ran, he could hear the shrieks of straining metal as the Voth ships, heedless of the damage, forced their way through the same breach he'd used. Turner slapped the airlock control, then turned and fired a few shots back towards his ship. A fuel line ruptured, spilling incandescent plasma onto the deck. It wouldn't stop the Voth for long, but every second counted. The airlock hissed open, and Turner threw himself through. His fingers flew over the keypad, engaging the emergency lockdown. Massive blast doors slammed down, sealing the docking bay. Turner allowed himself a half-second to catch his breath. Then he was moving again, running deeper into the maze of corridors, seeking a place to make his stand. The Voth would be right behind him, he knew. They wouldn't give up the chase, not when they were this close. But Turner was used to being the underdog. He'd spent his whole life fighting against the odds, scraping out victories through grit and guile and sheer bloody-minded tenacity. This was no different. He'd find a way. He had to. For his ship, for his mission, for the people counting on him, failure was not an option. Turner's boots pounded on corroded metal decking as he sprinted through the abandoned mining complex. Modular hab blocks and ore processing facilities flashed by, relics of a more hopeful time. Once, this place had been a hive of human industry, brave miners extracting platinum and palladium from the asteroid's rocky heart. The precious metals were the lifeblood of Earth's electronics industry, vital for everything from starship drives to medical nanites. But the war had changed everything. When the Voth came, the miners fled, leaving their machines to rust in the cold vacuum. Now only ghosts and memories remained. Turner vaulted over a conveyor belt, his pursued breath loud in his helmet. Dormant laser drills and massive excavators loomed on either side, their diamond-tipped blades dull with disuse. Dusty exosuits stood in silent ranks, once a miner's bulwark against the airless void, now nothing more than empty shells. Storage bays yawned open as he passed, revealing crates of unrefined ore. The raw potential of 1,000 industries, abandoned in the face of annihilation. So much lost. So many dreams turned to ashes. A loud hiss interrupted Turner's rumination, the sound of escaping atmosphere. He skidded to a halt before a pressure door, warning lights strobing red. The panel showed a critical breach in the adjacent section, the result of a micrometeorite puncture. Whoever said space was empty had never tried to hide in an asteroid field. The bark of plasma rifles echoed down the corridor, green bolts stitching the walls. The Voth had found him. Turner cursed, diving for cover behind a bulkhead. He returned fire, his aim true, but there were too many. They had him pinned. Desperation rising in his throat, Turner scanned for an escape. There, a door marked armory. A desperate gamble, but he had nothing left to lose. He squeezed off a few more shots, then sprinted for the door, zigzagging to throw off the Voth's aim. Plasma sizzled past, hot enough to blister even through his suit. At the last second, he hurled himself forward in a diving roll, slamming into the armory door. His rifle butt made short work of the lock. Turner tumbled inside, his fingers flying over the keypad. The door whooshed shut, and not a moment too soon. The booming of plasma impacts reverberated through the metal. Gasping, Turner surveyed the room, hardly daring to hope. Weapons racks stretched from floor to ceiling, laden with enough firepower to equip a small army. Plasma rifles, fragmentation grenades, even a few shoulder-mounted rocket launchers. A trove of death, left behind by the retreating miners. Turner allowed himself a tight grin. With this much ordnance, he could hold off the Voth indefinitely, buy himself time to plan his next move. He reached for the nearest rifle. And his heart sank. The weapon was dead in his hands, its indicator lights dark. He tried another and another with the same result. The power cells were drained, the inevitable entropy of abandonment. Despair crashed over Turner, cold and leaden. He was a rat in a trap with nothing to defend himself. The Voth would cut through the door soon, and that would be the end. Of him, of his mission, of the helpless colonists waiting for a salvation that would never come. A flicker of motion caught Turner's eye, a strange rippling in the corner like a desert mirage. He blinked, wondering if stress and exhaustion were taking their toll. But no, there it was again, a shimmering distortion that seemed to bend the very fabric of space. Slowly, hardly breathing, Turner approached the anomaly. As he drew near, the distortion coalesced, resolving into a humanoid figure. Turner recoiled, bringing his rifle to bear on reflex. The figure raised a four-fingered hand in a placating gesture. It was roughly human in shape, but taller and lither, with elongated limbs and a featureless ovoid head. Its skin was a quicksilver grey, shot through with pulsing bioluminescent patterns. A form-fitting bodysuit clung to its frame, shimmering with the same strange distortion that had first caught Turner's eye. "Do not be alarmed, Gary Turner." The figure spoke perfect English, its voice a melodic androgynous tenor that seemed to bypass Turner's ears and resonate directly in his mind. "I am here to help you." Turner gaped, shock temporarily overriding fear. In all his years plying the star lanes, he'd never seen an alien like this. The Voth, the Kroll, the 100 other known species, none of them even came close. Questions whirled through his mind. Who was this being? Where did it come from? How did it know his name? But before he could give voice to any of them, the armory door shuddered under a titanic impact. The Voth were through. Turner whirled, instinctively putting himself between the alien and the door. 1,000 possibilities raced through his head, each more desperate than the last. The alien watched him, its stance calm, almost serene. When it spoke again, its voice held a note of gentle amusement. "You have fought bravely, Gary Turner, but you need not face this threat alone. If you will trust me, I believe I can offer a way out of your current predicament." Trust, a tall order in a galaxy where betrayal lurked around every corner. But as the armory door buckled and strained, the scream of tortured metal filling the air, Turner realized he had no choice. Whatever this alien was, whatever it wanted, it couldn't be worse than what waited on the other side of that door. He lowered his rifle, meeting the alien's unblinking gaze. "I'm listening." The alien inclined its head, a gesture that might have been gratitude or respect. Then it raised its hand, and the shimmering distortion intensified, enveloping them both. Turner felt a strange tingling sensation, like static electricity dancing across his skin. His vision blurred, the armory stretching and warping around him. And then, between one blink and the next, they were somewhere else. A vast chamber, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that echoed those on the alien's skin. Banks of sleek, unfamiliar machinery lined the space, studded with glowing readouts and holographic displays. A view screen dominated the far wall, showing a starfield streaked with the blue shifted glow of faster-than-light travel. Turner turned to the alien, a million questions on his lips. But before he could voice them, a chime sounded, and the view screen flickered. The starfield vanished, replaced by an image that drove all other thoughts from Turner's mind. It was the Sirius B colony seen from orbit, but where there should have been the orderly grid of habdomes and atmoprocessors, there was only chaos. Buildings burned, their skeletal frames jutting from the rubble like broken bones. Craters pockmarked the surface, some still glowing with the radioactive aftermath of orbital bombardment. And in the midst of it all, Voth warships hung in the sky like bloated carrion birds, disgorging waves of drop pods that fell toward the surface like a plague of locusts. Turner's finger tightened on the trigger of his plasma rifle, the barrel leveled squarely at the alien's featureless face. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice tight with suspicion. "And how do you know my name?" The alien held up its four-fingered hands in a placating gesture. "I am Zorax, a scout from the Quantari Collective. We have been observing your species for some time." The name meant nothing to Turner. He'd never heard of the Quantari, and he thought he knew every spacefaring race in the galaxy. "Observing us? For what purpose?" "The Quantari are an ancient civilization," Zorax explained, his melodic voice calm despite the rifle aimed at his head. "We have watched the rise and fall of countless species, intervening only when necessary to maintain the balance of the cosmos." Turner snorted. "Intervening like you did with the Voth and humans, fat lot of good that did." "The ship your Voth pursuers found was one of ours," Zorax continued, unperturbed. "We left it as a test, to gauge their reaction to a new species in their space. Their aggression confirmed our fears about their expansionist intentions." Turner's mind raced. If what Zorax said was true, then the Quantari had been manipulating events from behind the scenes, pulling strings like cosmic puppeteers. The thought made his skin crawl. "So what do you want with me?" Turner asked warily. "My mission is to prevent the Voth from capturing you and learning about the illegal human colonies," Zorax said. "If they discover the extent of your operations, it could lead to another war, one that could devastate both your species." Turner laughed bitterly. "And why should I trust you? For all I know, this is some kind of Voth trick." Zorax reached slowly into a pouch on his belt, withdrawing a small glowing sphere. It pulsed with an inner light, like a miniature star cradled in his palm. "This is a quantum phase shifter," he said. "By attuning it to the frequency of the Voth's plasma weapons, it can create a force field that will absorb their shots. Allow me to demonstrate." He offered the sphere to Turner. Cautiously, never taking his eyes off Zorax, Turner lowered his rifle and took the device. It was surprisingly heavy for its size and warm to the touch. "Press the button on top to activate it," Zorax instructed. Turner hesitated, then did as he was told. As his thumb depressed the button, a shimmering blue field sprang into existence around him, encasing him in a bubble of translucent energy. At that moment, the armory door exploded inward, torn from its hinges by a plasma charge. Voth soldiers poured through the smoking hole, rifles spitting green fire. Turner flinched instinctively, expecting to feel the searing kiss of plasma against his skin, but the bolt splashed harmlessly against the blue field, dissipating like water on glass. The Voth soldiers faltered, momentarily taken aback by the ineffectiveness of their weapons. Turner seized the opportunity. He grabbed a pulse grenade from a nearby rack, armed it, and lobbed it at the clustered soldiers. The grenade detonated with a thunderous boom, a blinding flash of white light. The concussive blast hurled the Voth backward, their armor scorched and dented. "Time to go!" Zorax shouted over the ringing in Turner's ears. Turner needed no further encouragement. He sprinted out of the armory, Zorax close on his heels. Plasma bolts sizzled past them as the Voth recovered and gave chase, but the quantum phase shifter held, the protective field shimmering with each impact. They raced down the corridor, boots pounding on the metal deck. Turner's heart hammered against his ribs, adrenaline surging through his veins. He still didn't fully trust Zorax, but right now, the alien was his best chance of survival. And if there was even a chance that Zorax could help him complete his mission, could help him save the colonists on Sirius B, well then Turner would take it, no matter the cost. Turner and Zorax sprinted through the winding corridors of the mining complex, the sound of Voth plasma fire echoing behind them. The quantum phase shifter hummed with each impact, the protective field shimmering blue. They rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. Before them stretched a massive chamber, easily 100 meters long and half as wide. Towering machines filled the space, conveyor belts and crushing jaws, electromagnets and centrifuges. Along the walls, huge smelting furnaces loomed, dark maws waiting to be fed. "The ore processing center," Zorak said, consulting a holographic schematic projected from his wrist. "This is where they refined the raw minerals." Turner's eyes darted around the room, a plan forming in his mind. "Those furnaces," he said, pointing. "Could we lure the Voth in here and turn them on? The heat should cook them inside their suits." Zorax's head tilted, considering. It could work, but we'd need to get to the control room to reactivate the systems, and we'd have to keep the Voth occupied long enough for the furnaces to reach full temperature. Turner nodded grimly. "I'll handle the controls. You keep our scaly friends busy." They split up, Turner sprinting for the control room while Zorax took up a position near the center of the chamber. Turner's fingers flew over the dusty consoles, bringing dormant systems back to life. Status lights blinked on, ancient machinery whirring and clanking, as it woke from decades of slumber. On the main screen, Turner brought up the furnace controls. The massive units required an immense amount of power and would take several minutes to reach operational temperature. He initiated the startup sequence, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen. A flicker of movement caught his eye. On the security feeds, he saw the Voth soldiers pouring into the processing center, weapons raised. They advanced cautiously, fanning out among the machinery. Suddenly, a dozen holographic figures sprang into existence around the room, perfect replicas of Turner and Zorax. The Voth opened fire immediately, plasma bolts passing harmlessly through the decoys. The real Zorax was nowhere to be seen, hidden by his suit's chameleonic smart fabric, but his voice came over Turner's wristcom, calm and clear. "The decoys won't fool them for long. How much longer on those furnaces?" Turner checked the screens. 80%, just a little more. The Voth were getting closer now, sweeping the room methodically. One of them passed right by Zorax's position, close enough to touch, but the Quantari operative remained perfectly still, invisible to the soldier's keen eyes. At last the progress bar filled. Turner slammed his hand down on the activation key. With a deep, bone-shaking rumble, the furnaces roared to life. Angry red light spilled from their yawning doors, bathing the chamber in an infernal glow. Turner sealed the processing center doors remotely, trapping the Voth inside. On the security feeds, he watched as they staggered in the sudden blast of heat, their suit coolers struggling to compensate. One by one, they collapsed, falling to the scorched metal floor. Turner let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He met Zorax at the observation window, looking over the processing center. Below, the Voth lay unmoving, their suits blackened and blistered by the furious heat. "Why are the Quantari so interested in our war?" Turner asked, not taking his eyes off the fallen soldiers. "Why do you care if we wipe each other out?" Zorax was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his melodic voice was heavy with a sorrow that sounded almost human. "We have seen a future," he said, "where the Voth's hunger for conquest grows beyond all control. They will expand, subjugate, consume, until they threaten a power even greater than themselves, a species ancient and terrible that even the Quantari dare not name." Turner felt a chill run down his spine, despite the lingering heat from the furnaces. "This war, when it comes, will shake the very foundations of the galaxy," Zorax continued. "Billions will perish. Whole star systems will be scoured of life, and in the end there will be no victory, only ashes and ruin on a cosmic scale." He turned to face Turner, his featureless silver face inscrutable. "But the Quantari believe this future can be averted. If humans and Voth can find a way to coexist, to move beyond the ancient cycle of hatred and vengeance, then perhaps this great war will never come to pass." Turner barked a humorless laugh. "Coexist with the Voth? They'd sooner grind us under their boots than live in peace." "Perhaps," Zorax allowed, "but the alternative is the end of everything. Surely that is a fate worth striving to avoid, no matter the difficulty of the path." Turner looked away, his jaw clenched. He thought of all the friends he'd lost to the Voth over the years, the colonies burned, the lives shattered, the cold, gnawing ache of vengeance that had driven him for so long. Could he let that go? Could his people? Even if the price of holding on to it was the fall of galactic civilization itself? He didn't know, but as he met Zorax's impassive gaze once more, he knew he owed it to the fallen to try. "All right," he said at last, the words bitter on his tongue. I'll talk to the council, try to convince them to at least consider negotiations." It went against every instinct he had, every hard-learned lesson of a lifetime at war. But if the stakes were as high as Zorax claimed, what choice did he have? The Quantari nodded, a gesture that might have been approval or simple acknowledgement. "The path ahead will not be easy, but I believe you will find a way." With that, he touched a control on his wrist. The air around him shimmered, his form beginning to blur and fade. "Wait," Turner called out. "How will I contact you to let you know what the council decides?" Zorax's voice came back, an ethereal whisper, as his body dissolved into nothingness. "Do not worry, Gary Turner. We will be watching." And then he was gone, leaving Turner alone with the weight of the galaxy's future on his shoulders. Turner's mind raced as he tried to process Zorax's dire warning about the Voth-human conflict's potential to ignite a galaxy-consuming war. The sheer scale of the destruction, the trillions of lives at stake, almost defied comprehension. How could he, one lone human, hope to change the course of such vast and implacable forces? Before he could formulate a response, a sudden tremor rocked the mining complex. The deck plates bucked beneath his feet, throwing him off balance. Loose debris rained down from the ceiling, clattering off his helmet. "What the hell was that?" Turner demanded, righting himself. Zorax's head swiveled, his suit's sensors probing the station's superstructure. "An explosion deep within the facility. The reactor core is destabilizing." Turner's blood ran cold. He brought up his own suit's diagnostic display, the information confirming Zorax's assessment. The reactor was spinning out of control, its containment fields failing. The massive power surge from bringing the smelting furnaces online must have overloaded the ancient, poorly maintained systems. "If that reactor goes critical, it'll vaporize this entire asteroid," Turner said grimly. "We've got to shut it down." "Agreed." Zorax's voice was calm but urgent. "The control room lies at the end of this corridor." They sprinted down the passageway, the deck shuddering with ever-increasing violence beneath their boots. Cracks spider-webbed across the walls, atmosphere whistling out into the void. Turner's suit automatically sealed, its life support systems engaging with a hiss. They reached the control room, only to find a scene of utter devastation. Consoles sparked and smoked, their displays dark. Jagged hunks of metal protruded from the bulkheads, where panels had blown out. The acrid stench of charred electronics hung thick in the air. Turner picked his way through the debris to the main engineering station, Zorax a step behind. He scanned the readouts, his heart sinking. The reactor's control systems were damaged beyond repair, their vital components slagged by feedback surges. There was no way to remotely shut down the overload cascade. "The reactor core itself," Zorax said, reaching the same conclusion. "We'll have to manually trigger a scram." Turner nodded, his mouth dry. The reactor core was at the very heart of the facility, encased in layer upon layer of shielding. Even with his suit's heaviest rad protection engaged, prolonged exposure would be lethal. It was a suicide mission. Zorax stepped forward. "I will go. My Quantari physiology is more resistant to radiation, and my suit's shielding is superior to your human technology." Turner shook his head vehemently. "No, it has to be me." Zorax cocked his head. "I don't understand. This is the only logical course of action." "You said it yourself. The Quantari's mission preventing that future war. It's too important. The galaxy needs you." Turner swallowed hard, his next words tasting of ash. "I've taken so many lives in this fight against the Voth. Maybe it's time I gave mine to save others for a change." Zorax was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he inclined his head. "Your sacrifice will not be forgotten, Gary Turner." Turner managed a tight smile. "Just make sure it counts for something, okay?" With no time to lose, Turner hurried to the equipment locker, pulling out the bulky rad suit. He clambered into it, the servos whining as they sealed him inside a cocoon of lead foil and boron carbide. Thus armored, he made his way to the reactor access tunnel. A hulking blast door barred the way, warning sigils emblazoned across its armored surface. Turner keyed in the emergency override, the locking bolts disengaging with a ponderous clank. The door ground open, a billowing gout of radioactive steam blasting out to engulf him. Turner's suit fans roared, struggling to keep the air breathable as he stepped over the threshold. The rad counter on his HUD spiked immediately, its urgent chirps filling his helmet. He pushed forward, each step an effort as the suit grew ever hotter and heavier. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes. The tunnel's walls glowed cherry red with the infernal heat of the reactor, electrical discharges crawling along the metal like skeletal fingers. At last he reached the core itself, a towering cylinder wreathed in twisting coils and hissing conduits. At its base, the manual shutdown lever jutted from the housing, sheathed in protective ceramic. Turner reached for it, his rad suit's gloves clumsy and unwieldy. Just as his fingers brushed the handle, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He turned, disbelieving, to see a Voth soldier staggering into the chamber. The alien's armor was blackened and pitted, fused in places by searing heat. He must have regained consciousness and followed Turner, heedless of his own injuries. The Voth raised his plasma rifle, the barrel trembling as he tried to aim. Turner braced himself, knowing his rad suit offered little protection against the weapon's searing bolts. But then, incredibly, the Voth lowered his rifle. His slitted eyes met Turner's, a moment of silent understanding passing between them. In the face of this cataclysm, their war, their enmity, seemed so small, so petty. They had to save lives here. Nothing else mattered. The Voth limped forward, coming to stand at Turner's side. Together they grasped the shutdown lever. With a shared nod, they wrenched it down. A deep bone-shaking thrum reverberated through the station as the reactor powered down, its fury abating. The chamber's hellish glow dimmed, the searing heat dissipating. They had done it. The asteroid and everyone on it was safe. But it had come at a terrible cost. Warning alarms shrilled inside Turner's helmet as his rad suit's shielding failed, lethal doses of radiation penetrating to scorch his flesh. He collapsed, dimly aware of the Voth soldier crumpling beside him. Darkness ate at the edges of his vision, a cloying weakness dragging at his limbs. He fought to remain conscious, clinging to one final, desperate hope. Zorax. The Quantari had technology far beyond anything the humans or Voth possessed. If anyone could save them, it was him. As if summoned by Turner's thoughts, the alien appeared, a shimmering spectre leaping the final distance to kneel at their side. Glittering filaments extended from his gauntlets, probing Turner's suit, the Voth's armor. "Be still," Zorax urged, his melodic voice strained. "I will stabilize you." But as the filaments pulsed and glowed, weaving their arcane energies, Turner could see the truth in Zorax's eyes. The damage was too great, the radiation poisoning too severe. They were dying, the human and the Voth, their lives bleeding away in this shattered chamber, so far from the stars they had called home. In a blur of shimmering light, Zorax transported Turner and the wounded Voth soldier out of the reactor chamber. They materialized in the facility's main control room, the metal floor cold against Turner's fading consciousness. Around them, the other Voth soldiers stood in stunned silence, their weapons lowered, their faces a mix of confusion and awe. Zorax laid Turner and the Voth gently on the ground. Turner's breath came in ragged gasps, each one a struggle. The Voth soldier was in no better shape. His scales blackened and cracked, his armor fused to his flesh. But in that moment, as their eyes met, none of it mattered. The hatred, the decades of war and bloodshed fell away. In each other they saw not an enemy, but a kindred spirit, a being who, when faced with annihilation, had chosen to do what was right. Zorax turned to the gathered Voth, his voice resonant with sorrow and respect. This human, Gary Turner, sacrificed himself to save us all. He pulled the shutdown lever, knowing it would cost him his life. The Voth soldiers murmured among themselves, their slitted eyes wide with disbelief. One of them, a grizzled commander with a jagged scar across his snout, stepped forward. "Impossible," he hissed. "No human would do such a thing." Zorax fixed the commander with an unwavering gaze. And yet he did. He put aside his hatred, his very instinct for survival, to prevent the reactor from destroying us. The commander's gaze fell on Turner, taking in the human's ruined suit, the terrible burns that marred his flesh. Something flickered in those reptilian eyes, a glimmer of understanding, of recognition. Slowly, deliberately, the commander reached up and detached the insignia of rank from his own armor. He knelt beside Turner and placed it on the human's chest, just over his faltering heart. "You fought with honor," the commander said, his voice rough with emotion. "You died a warrior's death." Turner managed a weak smile, his hand coming up to clasp the commander's, a silent acknowledgement, a final moment of connection between two beings who had spent their lives as bitter foes. And then Turner's eyes drifted closed, his chest stilling as his last breath left him. The Voth commander bowed his head, a gesture of respect that needed no translation. In that instant a shift occurred, imperceptible yet profound, a change in the very fabric of the universe, born from the actions of one human and one Voth who, in the face of certain doom, had found common ground. It was a small thing, a fragile spark in the darkness of a galaxy torn by conflict, but it was a beginning, a first step on a path that might one day lead to peace. Zorax felt the weight of that moment as he helped the Voth carry Turner's body from the control room. The mining facility was in ruins, its corridors choked with debris, its machines silent and still. But it had served its purpose, had borne witness to an event that would echo through the ages. The Quantari scout ship was waiting in the hangar bay, a sleek silver arrow amid the wreckage. Zorax laid Turner's body in the rear compartment, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what he must do next. As the ship lifted off, leaving the asteroid behind, Zorax activated the communications array. He had messages to send, to the leaders of both the humans and the Voth. Messages that would recount the events of this day, that would implore them to see in Turner's sacrifice a chance for a new beginning. But even as he composed the words, Zorax knew that true change would not come easily. Centuries of hatred and mistrust could not be erased in a single moment, no matter how profound. It would take time and patience and no small amount of faith. Faith in the idea that despite all the darkness in the universe, there was still light to be found, that even the most bitter of enemies could, when faced with the ultimate test, find a way to stand together. The Quantari ship plunged into the swirling vortex of a wormhole, the stars stretching and distorting around it. Zorax leaned back in his seat, his eyes fixed on the shimmering displays, his mind turning over the events of the past few hours. There was still so much work to be done, so many challenges to face. But for the first time in a long while, Zorax felt a flicker of hope. Hope that the future he had glimpsed, the future where humans and Voth and 1,000 other species lived in harmony, might not be just a dream. It would be a long road, fraught with setbacks and obstacles, but as the ship hurtled through the infinite depths of space, Zorax knew that the journey had begun, and that, perhaps, was the greatest legacy of all. On the bridge of the Quantari ship, Zorax watched the holographic star map rotate slowly above the command console. 1,000 points of light, each representing a world, a civilization, a piece in the vast and intricate puzzle of the galaxy. And there, blinking softly among the constellations, was a new light, a symbol, a reminder of the events that had transpired on that distant, shattered mining facility. Zorax reached out, his long fingers brushing through the hologram. The light pulsed at his touch as if in recognition, in acknowledgement of the sacrifice that had brought it into being. A sacrifice that had shown for one shining moment that the cycle of war and hatred was not inescapable, that there was still hope for a better tomorrow, a future where the myriad species of the galaxy might find a way to coexist. It would not be an easy path. The scars of centuries of conflict could not be erased overnight. There would be resistance on both sides, those who clung to the old ways, who saw in the prospect of peace only weakness and surrender. But there would also be those who recognized the necessity of change, who understood that the alternative was a future of endless bloodshed, of worlds consumed by the fires of war, until nothing remained but ashes and regret. Zorax's mission was not over. In many ways, it was just beginning. He would continue to watch, to guide from the shadows, to nudge the course of events towards a brighter dawn. And he would carry with him always the memory of Gary Turner, a human who, in the final moments of his life, had shown the true depths of courage and compassion, who had looked into the face of his enemy and seen not a monster, but a mirror. The Quantari ship sailed on through the void, a silver seed carrying the hope of a galaxy, and in its wake the light of that new star continued to shine, a beacon in the darkness, a promise of what could be. Zorax knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, and fraught with uncertainty, but as he watched that light, as he felt the weight of its significance settling into his very bones, he knew that it was a road worth traveling. For at the end of it lay the chance for something greater, something worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for. A future of unity, of understanding. A future where the mistakes of the past could be learned from, could be forged into the foundation of a better world. It was a future that Gary Turner had given his life for. A future that, thanks to his courage and his compassion, was now one step closer to becoming a reality. And as the Quantari ship vanished into the swirling mists of the wormhole, Zorax made a silent vow, a promise to honor that sacrifice, to carry forward the legacy of a human who had dared to dream of peace in a galaxy at war. A human named Gary Turner. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.